Joe Burrow is still one of the front runners in the MVP race, according to NFL futures books, but Justin Herbert has surged ahead. Does Joe Burrow take too many sacks to be an MVP candidate? Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for following. Thanks for hitting the thumbs up button. We appreciate all of those things very much, especially those of you that make us your first listen every day. James, today we are going to get into some very interesting MVP odds that came out last week that saw Justin Herbert surge ahead of the pack. And Joe Burrow's odds take a step back. We'll get there in a few minutes. But first, maybe the reason that Joe Burrow is falling back in the pack, and I say this firmly tongue in cheek, is that he takes too many sacks. And this has been a point of contention for some of the analytics crowd. We talked about it a little bit with Eric Eager last week. Some other PFF analysts have gone on record doing a bunch of sack analysis, attributing sacks as a QB stat, which, fair. There's certainly some blame to be put on the quarterback. But recently, Joe Burrow talked about his attitude towards sacks. Not all sacks are created equal. He's willing to take sacks on third down instead of just throwing the ball away when trying to extend the play and make something happen, as long as it doesn't take his team out of field goal range. There's also a point of contention that he took the most first down sacks in the league. You could look further and say that PFF ascribed fault to Joe Burrow for sacks less often than many other quarterbacks in the NFL, for example. So a very intricate and interesting debate, because further you can look and see that Joe Burrow evaded a ton of sacks. So it's a pretty complicated discussion and complicated thing to criticize the Bengals quarterback for, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's fair to say. I honestly, I don't fault Joe Burrow really at all. And there are sacks. He took a sack in the Tennessee divisional round that knocked them out of field goal range. And it was like, man, that's a painful sack, Joe, that you took. But very rarely is that the case. And by the way, his offensive line got beat like a drum. Like I've seen a lot of young quarterbacks in that game specifically, but I've seen a lot of young quarterbacks get hit like Joe's gotten hit and not even gotten injured like he did as a rookie when he was getting hit entirely too much. And we had talked about it at the time. And then, it was that one hit and suddenly he needs left knee reconstruction surgery. And we're questioning the future and the present and everything that comes along with, Joe Burrow going down. And I've seen a lot of quarterbacks, they get gun shy and they see ghosts. And it didn't take long for Andy Dalton to see that in the pocket and feel that in the pocket and start throwing the ball away in 2016 earlier than he needed to and start moving in the pocket earlier than he needed to. And so to me, I think Burrow has navigated this part of it about as well as any quarterback, not just young quarterback, any quarterback can, because it's been such a thorn in the side in not just the side of the head of the Bengals offense. I mean, it just has for years now. And it's kind of gotten worse. It got worse, I think, in 2019 or 2020, Burrow's rookie year. I don't think it got much better last year, especially after Riley Reif went down. So that's the part of it where it's like, yeah, he does take sacks. But damn it, can you give him just an okay line? Because he's going to make that line look good better than most quarterbacks would, period. And I think he's done that. And that's why they were able to make a run to the Super Bowl. That's why he was able to make that big throw against the Titans after really getting just beaten up and confused at times, which was part of it. And so I don't really worry about the sacks when it comes to Joe Burrow. And he is going to end up taking some, trying to extend plays and make plays. At the same time, he was playing with such a bad line, or at least bad pieces of the line. Like, I don't think Jonah Williams is a bad player, right? I don't think Quentin Spain is a bad player necessarily. But when you mix that with young guys on the right side and a center that could barely move for half the season last year, well, now you're looking at it, it's like, And it's not a good group together. And so hopefully they can get to league average or better this season when it comes to that. Because if so, I think Joe Burrow is going to, reach a whole nother level. And so it's not really a concern to me to answer that the question about Burrow itself. The fact that he's escaped these past 2 years and isn't gun shy and isn't throwing the ball into the fifth row anytime there's pressure on him. I wouldn't be able to sit in that pocket after my knee had gotten shredded and still do. There's no way. And yet he was able to do that really without missing a beat last year.
Yeah, really good mental fortitude and comfortability to continue to play quarterback and continue to hang in the pocket whenever he could. I think that I'm not fully dismissing it. I think it is something he can get better at. I think it's something he probably will get better at. I think that you make a great point that the offensive line probably more at fault than Joe Burrow for a lot of the sacks that he took. But some of it could be wide receivers running the wrong route too. Some of it could be Joe getting confused, making the wrong read, not starting on the right side of the field, trusting Jamar Chase too much. And none of these are things I'm really going to fault him for because he's generally so good at all of those things. He's generally so good pre-snap. Generally, him trusting Jamar Chase is a really good thing. Generally, he has shown the ability to escape sacks and to make plays after contact in the pocket, either scrambling or throwing, as he did escaping Chris Jones against the Chiefs, for one example. And so there's a lot of high quality tape of Joe Burrow being evasive and elusive and making guys miss in the pocket. There's also some tape of him running into sacks and being a little bit too late to get rid of the ball and taking some hits that he doesn't need to. So it is a mixed bag, and I do think it's something that he'll continue to get better at. Now, am I concerned? Do I think it's going to hold him back from being a next level transcendent quarterback? Not really. So in that sense, I'm not concerned, but I do see it as an area where he can get better, and I think he will get better. And I think that, like you said, James, it's been accentuated by the offensive line woes because it's not just guys getting beat, it's communication issues, it's how quickly they're getting beat, it's how they're getting beat, it's getting beaten just the wrong way at just the wrong time sometimes, and at other times it's getting beat in such a way that Burrow has a hard time making guys miss. And so he's going to continue to support his offensive line and take responsibility because that's the kind of guy he is. And I'm sure he'll continue to work at it. But as we saw as the season went on, as he got healthier and he got more comfortable once again with the strength of his knee, he was really elusive in the pocket, I thought, and magical at making some of those plays. The Jamar Chase touchdown, rolling right against I think the 49ers, right? Where he throws it when Jamar's running left and Jamar has to put his foot in the ground and come back to the right side to catch the touchdown pass. Like, these are things that happen when he extends plays, and you don't want to take that away from him. But as we're probably going to say for the early part of Joe Burrow's career, there's a continual fine line where you can probably avoid some hits without losing that part of your skill set.
Sure. No, there's no doubt about that. And I think he's learning that part. I also think it makes it more difficult to learn that part when you know your offensive line is bad, right? When you know it's crumbling around you and you're going to have to make a play here. And so that's the part like that I come back to. And I know it's an issue. It's just like such a low issue on the list of things the Bengals should be worried about, in my opinion, because one, how he is, who he is, all those things. You knew that the offensive line was bad regardless of who was at quarterback. But the other part of this, do you have any doubt he's going to get better? And I know you don't, but like that's the point, is like he works his ass off. He's going to be fine in that realm, especially if this offensive line is what the Bengals are hoping it's going to be this season.
It should be better, and we should see Burrow evade pressure more readily than he did in the past too. And that's what's exciting because we've been watching this team with a bad offensive line for years. And I know you said when we were talking to Mike last week, I'm sick of talking about the offensive line. My retort was, I want to talk about the offensive line glowingly. I want to say nice things about the offensive line. That's what I want. Let's talk about how nice the pockets were for Joe Burrow, how big the cavernous holes were for Joe Mixon to run through. But
yeah, but honestly, it won't be nearly as much of a topic if they're just good enough.
I know.
And that part I'm looking forward to.
Yes, but also we have control over how much we talk about the offensive line. And if we want to heap praise, and you bet we will be early in the season if they're playing well, especially early in the season when it's new and exciting, that'll be fun too. Coming up next, Justin Herbert vaults up to the top of the MVP odds according to BetOnline.net. And it's a bit curious. We'll dive into MVP odds coming up next.
Yeah, and I got to tell you about BetOnline, because if you want to get good odds on Joe Burrow plus 1,200 to be the 2022 NFL MVP, you can do that right now at BetOnline, and it's a one-stop shop. And you could wager on Justin Herbert if you wanted to. Of course, it's a free country, and BetOnline is free to sign up. So you might as well check them out right now for all the latest odds, news, and so much more. By the way, you can wager on the NBA Finals, Major League Baseball, and anything and everything in between. So don't delay. Go there now. I've used them. Heck, I've made money on the NBA playoffs, and you can too right now at BetOnline. So go there now. Sign up for free on your PC, your mobile device. Check out everything, all the different wagers and prop bets they have in. Who knows? Maybe wager on the 2022 MVP right now at BetOnline. BetOnline, where the game starts.
MVP odds are always such a fun, contentious little topic. And Justin Herbert, as of May 25th, had the best odds to win the MVP, as we've discussed, at 11-2, edging out Josh Allen, whose odds actually improved to 6-1, just behind Justin Herbert. Patrick Mahomes at 9-1. Joe Burrow's odds fell from 10-1 to 11-1. So the odds makers are trying to attract bets, of course, but if you were to take these for their face value, they see Justin Herbert as essentially twice as likely. And I know the math isn't exactly right there for the sharp bettors out there that want to correct me about what these odds imply as far as implied probability, but Burrow at 11-1, Herbert at 11-2. I mean, also Joe Burrow ahead of guys like Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, and I guess those would be the most notable guys he's ahead of, behind Mahomes, Allen, Herbert. I mean, I think the biggest thing that stands out to me is how high Herbert is on this list, ahead of guys like Allen and Mahomes. But also, should Burrow really be this far behind that trio if you even accept that they're ahead of him in the first place? And I think you could say the same for Brady and Rodgers, but let's focus on Burrow, right?
Yeah, I think, look, here's what annoys me about most valuable is a team like the Chargers, right, where they've added. And if you ask people in Los Angeles or Chargers fans or Locked On Chargers, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, flawed roster the past couple of years. Now it's right. Now they've made the moves. They get J.C. Jackson. They get Khalil Mack. They get all these pieces. Now Herbert's going to thrive. Most valuable is who is the most valuable to their team. And so as the roster gets better, you see where I'm going. So to me, the way I would rank this, I think Aaron Rodgers would have a chance to be the most valuable again, because he just lost not the best receiver, because that's Cooper Kupp, but one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And so can he still be that valuable and still carry a team that, to me, no longer a legitimate NFC Super Bowl contender? I don't know if that's a take, but I don't think the Packers are without Devontae Adams. I just don't. So that would be one. Patrick Mahomes without Tyreek Hill. That's interesting. So that's how I kind of view it. So with Joe Burrow, well, we know how valuable he is to the Bengals, right? It's very clear. All of the flaws he's hidden throughout his 2 years in Cincinnati and how he's changed the franchise. I mean, I could have made a good case for him last year. Now, the numbers weren't necessarily there compared to who ended up winning it in Aaron Rodgers, but damn, Joe Burrow is valuable to this team. So let's say the comeback player of the year leads the Bengals to 12 or 13 wins and throws for 5,000 yards and 40 plus touchdowns. And none of those things to me seem that outrageous. And so like the path for him to win this, I think, is easier than some of these other guys, including Herbert, where, yeah, I think he could put up big numbers. But are we sure this Chargers team is going to be as good as everyone said? Are we sure that? And so there's an odds makers part of this where they're trying to cash in because of all the splashy moves the Chargers have made. I get that. At the same time, I think Burrow's a good bet. I think Aaron Rodgers would be a good bet. You mentioned Lamar Jackson being low. That's a pretty good
25 to
bet.
1. Yeah.
After they trade Hollywood Brown, like if the Ravens are going to be good, guess what? Lamar Jackson's probably going to put up huge numbers. And so that's kind of how I view MVP. I think Burrow's in that, even though his team added. But there are a lot of guys that have less around them, at least on paper, that are really intriguing. Rodgers, Lamar Jackson, and Patrick Mahomes. Those are the three that stand out to me.
Another crazy one is Tua Tagovailoa going from 200 to 1 on March 13th to 33 to 1 on May 25th.
Jesus.
I guess Tyreek Hill is important. But it's interesting because I don't think the NFL sees MVP voting the way you do necessarily. I think some people do. But I think most MVP voters are essentially voting for which quarterback was the best this year. I know Cooper Kupp had some votes last year. Last year, it was 78% of the votes to Aaron Rodgers, 20% of the votes to Tom Brady, 2% of the votes to Cooper Kupp.
Mm-hmm.
But largely, I don't know how much the NFL considers how much a guy is elevating his team, because Joe Burrow would have gotten votes
Sure.
if that were the case. I know he's a second-year player, and they hold that against him too. And now, as a third-year player, perhaps that comes off a little bit, unless he was more dominant. Patrick Mahomes, I think, won an MVP, and so did Lamar Jackson in his second year, from what I recall. So
it's because people don't know what valuable means, and
I think so.
They think it's like most outstanding quarterback award.
Well, that's what it essentially is. Yes.
But if it's most valuable quarterback, that still fits. But yeah, the valuable word is what gets really messed up and caught and lost in the shuffle for sure.
And when you focus on it that way, Patrick Mahomes does stand out amongst these front runners as a guy who has lost some stuff. I know he has an offensive line that's heavily invested in, and I know they did some, Juju Smith-Schuster, et cetera, did some work to try to fill in their wide receiver room. But Tyreek Hill's a big deal, man. And that's reflected in Tua Tagovailoa on the other end. Justin Herbert, to your point, has a ton of talent around him. They continue to bring in offensive linemen, defensive superstars in J.C. Jackson, Khalil Mack, like you mentioned. They retain their wide receivers. They have a draft that most people liked, starting with Zion Johnson. Josh Allen, people are calling the Bills the best roster in football. And I know Josh Allen is good, but if you're talking about valuable, then you hold that against him a little bit, right? And I think you hold it against Burrow too, because they've put incredible wide receiver weapons around him. They have a really good running back in Joe Mixon for him, and they've just invested in 3 offensive linemen. So it's no longer so dire that Burrow needs to elevate them so much. But you should, on the flip side of that, see Burrow elevate himself, because those around him are at a higher skill level this year, at least on paper and health assumed, than they were last year. And so that will be the interesting bit. And the AFC being a gauntlet, also, I think, a factor here. How much does that weigh in for these 4 AFC quarterbacks ahead of Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, the 2 highest NFC players on this list? So some interesting things to look at. And as you mentioned too, this is all just a sports book trying to attract bets. So there's always that to consider when we look at MVP odds.
Yeah, it's
odds.
Like with Burrow, he wouldn't be my favorite bet here because of some of the things you mentioned, because there is talent around him, but it's going to be that happy medium, right? Where because it isn't going to be voted just most valuable. It's going to be most valuable along with winning team that puts up huge numbers. And so, like, if you told me Burrow throws for 45 touchdowns, that wouldn't be crazy to me. I think Joe Mixon had a ton of touchdowns last year. I think the Bengals were limited at times and inconsistent at times on what they could do in the passing game specifically. And so I think they should be more efficient. I would not be shocked at all if he throws for way more touchdowns and tops the 5,000 yard mark. So you can see the path to it. And so that's where I'm at. But yeah, Herbert's going to be, it could certainly be in the mix. Josh, all these guys. But yeah, I think Burrow probably a bit too low, and certainly shouldn't be way behind Justin Herbert. I think that's kind of wild.
There's also probably some like Super Bowl hangover baked into this, as that has been a historical trend. And you see all this stuff about history, but if Joe Burrow's taught me anything, it's that trends don't necessarily apply to him the same way they apply to others. And Joe Burrow's taught me lots. That's just one of the lessons. The Bengals could use a little bit of help for Joe Burrow. And it's not necessarily a starter. We talked about how 22 of those starting positions are mostly accounted for, but maybe they need a little bit of depth. We're going to talk about what the Bengals could do to shore up their depth heading into training camp coming up next.
But first, a word from Rock Auto. With everything going on right now, right? Summer's coming along, and heck, you might be planning vacations, and well, you still got to get back and forth to work and pick up the kids and all of those things. And there's nothing worse than having unreliable transportation. And rockauto.com can help you stay on the road for less. Get the same quality parts that you're going to get from the big box store or the car dealership, but you're not going to spend 30, 50, even 100% more on them. So whether you're someone like me who likes to replace his own cabin air filter, or if you're a diehard mechanic do-it-yourselfer that's going to replace a fuel pump, rockauto.com is going to have you covered for all the makes and models that you're looking for. Whether it's a Mercedes-Benz, a Toyota, a Daewoo, they got you covered at rockauto.com. They've been in the business for more than 2 decades. They're a family-owned company, and you should go there now, rockauto.com. See all the parts available for your car or truck. Be sure to write Locked On in their "How did you hear about us" box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com.
When you look at depth on the 2022 Cincinnati Bengals roster, a few names stand out to me. Stanley Morgan Jr., Mike Thomas, Trent Taylor, Trenton Irwin, Javon Hiley, Puka Williams, Kwame Lassiter, Jack Sorensen. They become less familiar the longer I go. Kendrick Pryor. These are the wide receivers vying to back up the Bengals' tremendous starting three.
Man, you didn't even know who Kendrick.
Tyler Boyd.
You forgot about Kendrick Pryor.
I forgot. I never knew. Kendrick Pryor.
Yeah. No, it's an issue. And I think it's a pretty obvious issue at practice. You know, there's a clear pecking order, and it's even more obvious right now with T. Higgins not participating. The Bengals need an offensive, someone who can contribute on offense consistently behind the big three. And that doesn't mean that they're going to need this person to do that all the time, but you need someone, because right now, I mean, Stanley Morgan Jr. last week, or 2 weeks ago, rather. Last week, it was Mike Thomas. Who knows who it's going to be on Tuesday when I'm at practice. But those were the guys that were filling in at that wide receiver 4 spot. And I'm not disrespecting them. I'm not saying they're bad players by any stretch. But when you want to be a team that's competing for championships and division crowns and AFC titles and making another run, you need to have firepower. You need to have weapons. And I like Hayden Hurst. I like Joe Mixon. I like Chris Evans. Samaje Perine made plays last year. All of these things. But you need one more receiver, one more piece. And I think that's a need, like a legitimate need that they hopefully look at as something that they need to address. And I know people are excited about Kwame Lassiter and Javon Hiley and some of these undrafted guys. And they may end up being good players for the Bengals. That isn't wide receiver 4 in 2022. I hate to break it to you. It's just not.
Yeah, and it stands out when they're in their starting, right? What if it was the guy we've talked about a lot, whose name I'm
Forgetting
blanking
his name.
on?
What? Trent Taylor?
No, the wide receiver from the Texans who
Will Fuller.
Will Fuller, sorry, blanking.
Oh, that's to me, of the guys available, Will Fuller's the best there.
You've talked about him a lot. You've been on that train.
Well, because and I'm not saying he's Jamar T. He's not. But if you lost one of those guys for a couple games, defenses still have to scheme for Will Fuller. Like, it's not like they can just be like, oh, hey, Jack Sorensen, who? We don't even need to watch the film on this dude. We'll just guard him. No. Like, you're still going to have to pay attention to Will Fuller. He'll beat you over the top, and Joe Burrow is going to find him, and it's going to be 6. And so that would be the one that I'd be trying to recruit hard. There's rumblings that the Browns could go after him, and there's a Deshaun Watson tie there as well. And I get that, and they have the need. But, I mean, the only issue he's had, and it's a big issue, has been health. But he didn't play much last year, 60-something snaps. And so I think he's going to be cheap, and he may want to come into a situation like this where he can show he can stay healthy, especially because he might be able to put up pretty big numbers as wide receiver 4. Like, I don't think it's 2 touchdowns if he comes here. I think he may end up with 6 tutties. And even if all these wide receivers stay healthy and play all 17 games.
Well, it also relies on him staying healthy, and I think that's probably why his market is what it is or isn't. It would be fun though. I think he would be probably the most entertaining of the wide receiver 4 options and the one that has the most to offer if he does need to come off the bench. There are some other names that I think would be interesting as far as veteran options if they choose to go that route. T.Y. Hilton, Emmanuel Sanders. Some of those, I don't think they're in the Julio Jones or Odell Beckham Jr. running, but those guys out there too. And I know somebody in the mailbag asked about Antonio Brown last week, and I mean, we're not even close to talking about Antonio Brown. So there are
T.Y.
some,
Hilton. T.Y. Hilton would be fun.
yeah, there's some veteran wide receivers who are solid, and then you can go further down the list for guys like Willie Snead and who did we talk about previously? Maybe he got signed since
Keelan
I
Cole
last
got
looked at this
signed
list.
because he
Yeah,
would have been
that
he
was
would
the
have been a
one.
good one, but the Raiders signed him and traded Brandon Edwards
Yeah, so the options are dwindling a
or
bit.
Brian Edwards. It's Brian Edwards. Sorry.
They traded Brian Edwards.
Yep.
Wow, I missed
Man,
that.
you really unplug during the offseason, don't you?
I have unplugged a little bit lately. That being said, the point is there's
The
some wide
Falcon.
receivers out there that could potentially be serviceable wide
Full
receiver fours.
full. And I will say this. I do know the Bengals liked Fuller in the draft, and I'm going
Yeah,
to say one more. They liked T.Y. Hilton in the draft way back when. Now, this is forever ago,
different
but
staff.
they did
Yeah,
different. Duke was there. That's about it,
that
right?
might be it. Yeah, for T.Y. Hilton specifically. Yeah, maybe some of the scouts.
Maybe.
Anyway, I think that you and I probably agree that that's a big one. I think that
Mhm.
they could. I mean, we talked about this, 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago now. We did a free agent draft episode. So a lot of those players still available. We talked about some guys on the edge. Trey Flowers from Detroit was one that stood out to me. Justin Houston, another edge guy. And, maybe they kick the tires again on Tack McKinley. I don't know. Probably not. But there are some edge guys out there that could be interesting additions as well. And of course, maybe they decide they need to go get an interior offensive lineman. Those are the ones that I would have my eyes on if they do choose to bolster anywhere going into camp. But wide receiver, yeah, that's one that with T. Higgins' absence continues to stand out for a guy that
Mhm.
can contribute, as you said, on offense. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. We're still going daily here on Locked On Bengals at this part of the offseason. The Bengals are open to the media for practice on Tuesday. And so we'll have some stuff to look forward to then. Until next time, Bengals fans, thanks for listening. Hoo day